Hello, and thanks for joining us.
Today, we'll be looking over the Search Form tab in the WPSuperDealer admin settings.
Please take some time to read over the tips and tricks section.
Vehicle search forms can become overly complicated, and it has been our experience that keeping things simple will result in higher conversion rates.
If you have a small inventory, then we suggest using a minimal number of search fields.
The last thing you want a visitor to see is no results found. When adding vehicle search forms to your site, it's a good idea to think of less is more.
With that being said, WPSuperDealer allows you to add any vehicle specification field to your search forms. There's a temptation to let visitors search on any and every field, but if you do that, people are going to be overwhelmed by choices, and even if they do search, the criteria could be so narrow that they may only see a single result,
if any at all. Now you might understand why we urge restraint in the number of fields you allow to become searchable.
Let's briefly discuss how the search form works, and special considerations that need to be taken into place when using different cache tools on your site. The search form is powered by a static JSON file.
Think of it as a file that has a miniature version of your inventory, with all the searchable fields in it.
You don't want that file to be too big, so if you have a large inventory,
say over 1,000 vehicles,
make sure you test things from a user perspective to make sure it flows quickly and smoothly. The file is named search-json1.txt. The 1 refers to the blog ID. If you've installed this on a multi-site, then that number would be the blog ID of the site the inventory is on.
The file will be saved in your Uploads folder.
You can click on the Build JSON file button to regenerate your JSON file at any time.
There is also a setting to schedule a daily update of the JSON file. Don't forget to set up your schedule.
Your search form needs to update daily to correctly reflect your inventory. It is suggested that you set up the schedule for early in the morning.
At a time you make significant changes to your inventory, you can manually build the JSON file to keep your search form up to date.
If you use any type of cache on your site or on your server, then you need to make sure this file is cleared at least once a day. Your form can be displayed with the block, the widget, or the shortcode. Each of the general settings for your search forms is fairly self-explanatory. You can update the JSON file. Schedule it to be updated. Set it to not cache in a visitor's browser. Turn on or off the numbers next to each search item, denoting how many of that type is in stock. There is also an option to auto-load the inventory when an item is selected, or have users select all criteria before click to submit. Lastly, there is an option to change the mobile event that equates to a click.
This last option was added for certain edge cases where the tap event may not be available or working as expected. One item of note: if you run into issues where your search form should be dynamically loading selections and it's not working, then you may have the form accidentally pointing at the wrong page to find your inventory.
If we look at the Search Form tab, we'll notice there's a sub-tab called Search Fields. Clicking on this gives us the ability to select which vehicle specification fields to include as potential form fields.
All of your specification fields for all vehicle types are listed here.
You'll see a few items are already checked. You'll also notice you can click on each field to access controls specific to each field. Let's look at the body style field. We can change its label, choose if it's a select box, checkboxes, or a range field. Obviously, if you choose range, then you'll need to make sure the values only contains numbers.
No commas, no currency symbols, only numbers.
You can also enter a default search value.
Keep in mind that if you enter a default value and you have it set to auto-load the inventory on search, then the form will automatically filter the inventory by that value when the page loads.
Next, you can select if it's dynamic, meaning the values available in the field are filtered when a value in another field that has the last checkbox here checked is selected by a user.
This means the last checkbox determines if selecting a value in this field changes the values in the other fields.
Let's look at this in a simple checkbox form. This field has filter by check. Checking one of the options will filter the other fields if they themselves have dynamic checked.
Typically, range fields, like price or mileage, don't filter the other form fields. You have the ability to make them dynamic, but it's not a supported feature at this time, and may produce some, shall we say, interesting results.
All of these options and settings are global settings that are used by default if a field is added to a search form. When we save these settings, it automatically generates our JSON file.
If you have a very large inventory, then this process may time out. If this occurs, then please ensure your server is allowing enough time on the server to process your inventory.
One eternity later.
Now that we've seen the basic behind setting up the fields for our forms, we still need to look at the different ways it can be added to a page.
Let's start a new page and drop a vehicle search form. You can see the block settings that can override some of our global settings. But you can also pick a different style, add the vehicle sort to the form, show or hide the submit button, change what the button says, choose which available fields are active, and change some of the settings for the fields themselves.
Let's take a brief look at the widget settings.
The new default WordPress theme doesn't really have an appropriate sidebar area to put a search form, but since we just need to look at the settings real quick, we can just drop it in any of them. You can change it to any of the 4 style by changing the number in the custom CSS class name from 1 to 2, 3, or 4.
There is also a way to select specific fields and even reorder them by entering a pipe-delimited list of field slugs. Just FYI, field slugs are a lowercase version of the field name with space replaced by underscores.
Entering body style, pipe, make, model would create a form with only those 3 fields in the order given. Now that we've seen a small sample of what can be done, we've reached the end of our video. We want to thank you for joining us and hope to see you in the next video,
where we'll take a look at sorting our vehicles.
God bless.
Con te l'hanno veduta sì,